She leaned in so close I could feel her perfume burn in my nose, and I braced for words of closure, maybe even something kind about the decades we'd spent together. Instead, her lips barely moved as she whispered, "You're nothing." That single word cut deeper than every judgment the court had stamped against me that afternoon. She turned away, heels clicking against the marble floor, her hand sliding into the arm of Hank, my best friend since I was a kid, like he had always belonged there. He didn't glance back once. By the time the courthouse doors closed behind me, I had nothing left but the shirt on my back and a manila envelope crammed with legal papers declaring I'd lost my home, my marriage, and the life I thought I'd built. That night I parked my old truck behind a greasy spoon off Route 19, wrapped my jacket around me, and let the silence press down hard. My body ached from more than work. It ached from betrayal. I was staring at the cracked ceiling of my cab when my phone buzzed close to midnight. Unknown number. For a second I thought it might be a cruel prank. Something told me to answer. A calm, precise voice said, "Mr. Dawson, this is Zurich International Private Banking. We've been trying to reach you for nearly 15 years. I blinked, thinking it was some scam. Then the man said my uncle's name, Edward Dawson, a man who had vanished from our family nearly 2 decades ago. He read out an account number, paused, then said, "You are the legal heir. The balance is $47 million. My pulse thundered in my ears. But before I could form words, the banker added something that sent a shiver through me. "There's more you need to know about how that money was earned. My name is Michael Dawson. I'm 51, and until that night I thought my life was set in stone. I wasn't wealthy, not by headlines or headline standards, but I was steady. 30 years in construction taught me what honest sweat could build. From sunrise to dusk I carried lumber, drove nails, poured concrete with my own hands. I believed loyalty meant everything, that family was stronger than temptation, that doing the right thing even when nobody noticed was enough to make a life last. I met Lauren when we were just kids. I was 21 when we stood before a preacher with more faith than furniture to our names. We rented a shoebox apartment near Yonkers, patched it with second-hand couches, chipped mugs, and big dreams. I took every job I could, roofing in summer heat, digging trenches in freezing mud, fixing up homes room by room. She worked nights at a diner, chasing her nursing degree by day. We were a team stitched together by grit. I can still remember splitting a peanut butter sandwich on the porch of our first fixer-upper, her feet swinging as she handed me lemonade and told me we'd make it big one day. And we did. I hustled my way into city contracts, built a crew that people trusted. The money started rolling in. One year, I surprised her with a house that I thought would lock our dreams into reality. It wasn't gaudy. It was a classic brick estate in Westchester. 5 bedrooms, a garden she swore she'd fill with lavender. I paid most of it in cash, the rest in financing. Lauren smiled, called it a real home. But behind her eyes, something shifted. She joined clubs, boards, charity circles. Her laughter grew sharper, her eyes colder. Dinners turned into social events I wasn't invited to. She started speaking a language of wine tastings and vacations, while I still spoke in lumber and long days. I thought maybe I just had to catch up. I clung to the life we'd built. The fishing trips with my daughter Emily, Sunday dinners with my mother, the smell of sawdust that reminded me of where I came from. Hank wasn't just my best friend, he was family in every way that mattered. We'd hammered nails side by side on jobs that nearly broke our backs. Hunted deer in the Adirondacks until our fingers went numb from the cold. Carried each other's couches up too many narrow staircases. And shared more beers under the stars than I could count. When my father died, it wasn't my brother who stood next to my mother at the graveside. It was Hank, his hand steady on hers while I stood mute, too broken to speak. I trusted him with everything, my secrets, my family, my life. I would have taken a bullet for him without hesitation. Maybe that trust blinded me. Maybe I didn't want to see what was in front of me. Lauren and Hank began orbiting each other in ways I brushed off at first. Charity events, planning meetings, late-night fundraisers. She told me I was too tired from work, that I never wanted to go out anymore. And she wasn't wrong. I was working myself raw, convinced that every hour I put in was proof of my love. But the harder I worked, the farther she drifted. Words stopped being shared. She moved to the guest room more nights than not. I'd lie in our bed staring at the ceiling, searching for the woman I'd once built a whole life with over peanut butter sandwiches on a porch we could barely afford. I remembered something my Uncle Edward told me when I was 17. He was the oddball in the family. Tailored suits at Thanksgiving, cufflinks that glinted under the lights, a Bentley parked in my grandmother's gravel driveway. One night he caught me staring at his watch and said, "Michael, don't ever think a roof means safety. Sometimes it just hides the truth waiting to crush you." I didn't get it back then. Now I do. What happened to my marriage wasn't a sudden collapse. It was years of erosion, quiet as a river grinding stone down to dust. But even knowing something was wrong, I never expected how far it had gone. The day it all came crashing down was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were my early days. The one night I tried to come home while there was still light outside. I had been up in Syracuse finishing a cedar deck extension. My hands were blistered, my back tight, but I felt good driving home. A white box of Lauren's favorite cannoli on the seat beside me. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could sit out back, eat dessert, talk about something real. When I turned into the driveway, Hank's truck was there. Nothing unusual at first glance. He'd dropped off venison before, helped me with stubborn repairs. But the air was too still, the house too silent. I walked through the back door, boots thudding on the kitchen tile, and froze when I heard it. A laugh. Hers. Soft, low. The same laugh that used to crease the corners of her eyes when I kissed her neck. But it wasn't mine she was laughing with. I moved up the stairs slowly, like each step was a weight pressing me deeper into the earth. At the top I heard his voice. "Hanks." I opened the bedroom door. There they were, my wife and my best friend. No shock, no scrambling to explain. Hank pulled his shirt on in silence, his face twisted but empty. Lauren just sat there on the edge of the bed, legs crossed, smoothing her hair. She didn't even flinch when she looked at me. She simply said in the calmest voice I've ever heard, "You're early." Hank muttered something, some hollow excuse that never made it past my ears. I wasn't listening. I turned, walked down the stairs out to the garage, and sat on a stack of plywood. I stared at the concrete floor until the world blurred. Everything, the late nights, the distance, the way she'd pulled away from Emily, from my mother, from me, it all locked into place. That night I didn't touch the cannoli. It sat in its box on the counter until morning, when I found it dumped in the trash. By then, Lauren had already filed for divorce. No fights, no apologies, no pretense of trying. She wanted out, and she wanted more than half of everything I had built with my own hands. I tried to stay civil, but deep down I knew the storm was only just beginning. "I'll make this easy on both of us," I told her, my voice low enough that only she could hear. "We don't need a war. We can settle quietly." Lauren laughed, a sharp little sound that cut straight through me. "You're the builder, Michael, not the brain. Let the court decide." She wasn't bluffing. Within a week she had hired Donovan Pierce, one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the state. Clean-cut, silver-tongued, with a suit so pressed it looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. His smile never reached his eyes. When he walked into that courtroom, I knew I wasn't fighting just Lauren. I was fighting a machine built to dismantle me. Donovan didn't waste time. He painted me as a hothead, a man with no emotional control, a workaholic who neglected his wife. He twisted arguments until they sounded like confessions. He dragged out texts from years ago, stripped of context, making it seem like I was cruel instead of exhausted. He even tracked down 2 subcontractors I'd fired during the recession, men who had sued me over unpaid invoices that I eventually cleared. On the stand, they swore I was dishonest, unstable. My financial records from that same recession year were presented like some smoking gun, as if struggling through hard times meant I'd been hiding assets. I sat there in my one decent suit, collar choking me like a rope, while strangers in the gallery watched my life get dismantled piece by piece. Across the aisle, Lauren never flinched. Not a tear. Not even the courtesy of looking ashamed. She sat in her black dress, hair pinned neat, legs crossed like she was at some charity gala, her attorney whispering in her ear while I tried to remember how breathing worked. Emily tried. My daughter sat on that stand and told the truth that her mother had changed, that she'd pulled away from the family, that I had been there for her in ways her mother hadn't. Lauren never once looked at her. Not when Emily's voice shook, not when her eyes searched the courtroom for her mother's face. She just kept her gaze fixed forward like Emily was a stranger. 9 months. 9 months of motions, hearings, depositions, cross-examinations. And when the ruling finally came down, it was everything I'd already expected. The mansion, hers. Most of the savings, hers. The retirement account split. What I was left with was my truck, my tools, and the bare apartment I'd been renting just to have somewhere to sleep. That was it. 30 years of sweat and sacrifice boiled down to scraps. But the strangest part wasn't the ruling. It was the way I felt. Not angry. Not broken. Just hollow. Like I'd been sitting in a theater, watching someone else's tragedy unfold. And when the credits rolled, the lights came on, and it turned out the man on stage was me. Outside the courthouse I stood alone. Hank wasn't there. I pictured him back at the mansion, maybe already pouring champagne into the crystal flutes I'd unpacked the day we moved in. Lauren walked past me with Donovan at her side. She slowed just enough to lean close, her perfume sharp and cold. "You're pathetic," she whispered, and then she was gone. I didn't chase her. I didn't say a word. I walked to the parking garage, climbed into my truck, and sat behind the wheel with my hands trembling like I'd been in a fistfight. I had lost my wife, my best friend, my home, and the life I had spent decades building. But that night, everything turned. I couldn't stomach the thought of going back to that hollow apartment with its white walls and stale air. So I drove. North, past the city lights, past the endless suburbs, until the road grew dark and quiet. Around 10, I pulled into a diner lot off Route 9, killed the engine, leaned back in the seat, and shut my eyes. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a second, I thought it might be the court. Or worse, Lauren calling to remind me one more time what she'd taken. I nearly ignored it. Something in my gut told me to pick up. "Is this Michael Dawson?" a man asked. His voice carried a clipped European edge. "Who's asking?" "This is Simon Keller with Gallon Private Banking Group in Zurich. We've been attempting to reach you for several years. Are you the nephew of Edward Dawson?" The name jolted me awake. My Uncle Edward, my father's older brother. The outlier. The man who breezed into holidays in silk ties and Italian shoes. Who flicked $100 bills into my hand like party favors, then disappeared for years at a time.
He hadn't been seen since I was in my 20s.
Rumor was he moved to Europe, made a fortune, and vanished for good. I hadn't thought of him in years. "Yes," I said slowly. "Edward Dawson was my uncle. Why?" "Mr. Dawson, you are listed as the sole beneficiary to a dormant account. By law, before it is liquidated, we are required to contact you. Your uncle gave us strict instructions. The account was to be released only once a particular legal condition had been fulfilled." My heart thudded. "What condition?" "That you were no longer bound by marriage." The words struck like a hammer. I sat up, gripping the wheel. "What kind of account are we talking about?" There was a pause, a breath across the line. Then he said, "As of this evening's statement, the balance stands at $47,891,421.77. I stared into the dark. The silence in my truck broken only by the sound of my own breathing. For the first time in months, my hands stopped shaking. I couldn't breathe at first. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I stared at the dashboard like the numbers might glow there, confirming what I had just heard. The banker's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Dawson, are you still with me?" "Yes," I whispered. "Barely." He explained that my uncle, Edward Dawson, had funneled a series of discrete investments, private equities, rare banking bonds, offshore trusts, into a single account over a decade before disappearing from the financial world altogether. The money hadn't sat idle. It had grown carefully, steadily, sheltered by layers of legal armor and silence. I asked him why no one had reached out sooner. His answer knocked the air from me. Your uncle was deliberate. He did not trust your spouse. His words, not mine. His instructions were precise. We were to wait until your marital status changed. He told us, and I quote, "Michael must be free before he remembers who he is." That phrase stopped me cold. I had heard something like it before. I was 16 when Uncle Edward took me fishing one morning, just the two of us. He wore loafers on a riverbank, an odd sight, but I didn't forget what he said as we watched the water run. "Money's just a mirror, kid. It'll show you who you are. Just make sure you know yourself before you look." Back then I thought he was just being cryptic. The eccentric uncle who smelled of cigars and carried secrets in his briefcase. But now it felt like he'd planned this moment all along. Simon Keller, the banker, spoke again. "We will need your physical presence in Zurich to finalize identification and sign the release papers. All expenses are covered. Travel, accommodations, everything. The funds can be transferred anywhere you wish." I didn't answer right away. My mind was caught between the dust of my demolished marriage and the door that had just swung open to a life I couldn't begin to picture. I told him I needed time. He gave me a direct number, his tone patient as if he already knew I'd call back. When the line went dead, I sat in the dark cab of my truck gripping the wheel like it was the only solid thing in my world. The stars above the diner lot seemed brighter, sharper, like they knew the ground under my feet had shifted forever. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt undone. The next morning, I called my mother. I told her everything. She didn't gasp or cry or demand proof. She simply said, "Edward always did know more than he let on. Maybe now you can finally breathe, Michael." Emily was next. My daughter was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, "Dad, you deserve this. Just promise me you won't let it change who you are." That same afternoon, I booked a flight to Zurich. No hesitation. I packed light. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, my worn leather wallet, and the watch my father had given me when I graduated high school. That was all I needed. I didn't call Lauren. She wasn't owed an explanation. This wasn't about revenge or courtrooms. It was about finding out what my uncle had left me. Not just the money, but the meaning behind it. When the plane landed on a gray Monday morning, Zurich felt like another planet. The streets were pristine, the air sharp with the smell of rain on stone, the people brisk in their movements, wrapped in sharp suits and confidence. I hadn't left the country since my honeymoon in Mexico, and now here I was, a man who had slept in his truck only weeks before, walking through a Swiss airport with a letter from a private bank folded in my coat pocket. A driver met me at arrivals, holding a sign with my name in neat black letters. He was polite, efficient, and said almost nothing as we slipped into a black Mercedes and drove through the heart of the city. The car wound its way up a hill until Lake Zurich stretched wide and glimmering below us. The building at the top looked like it belonged in another century. Stone walls, iron gates, gold letters carved into the arch, Gallon Private Banking Group. Inside, the air smelled of polished leather and old money. I was guided down a long corridor, my boots echoing on marble floors until we reached an office that looked more like a library. Mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books, a globe taller than my daughter, windows that opened to a view of the lake so still it looked like glass. A man stepped forward, his smile calm, practiced. Early 60s, gray at the temples, eyes that studied me like he'd been waiting years. He extended his hand. "Mr. Dawson, welcome. I'm Simon Keller. We've been expecting you." He poured me coffee, placed a thick folder on the desk, and began to unravel the story. My uncle hadn't simply vanished. He had orchestrated his disappearance. He liquidated properties, shifted investments, and removed himself entirely from the American financial system. What remained was more than wealth. It was a trail of decisions protected across borders, designed to arrive in my hands only when the time was right. And for the first time since my life had been torn apart, I felt the faint pull of something stronger than loss, purpose. Michael stared down at the folder Simon Keller had placed in front of him, his pulse pounding in his ears. Inside were not only documents but letters, real handwritten letters from his uncle Edward Dawson. They had been sealed away for years, locked up until one condition was met. Michael's divorce had to be finalized. The first letter began in Edward's distinct, slanted handwriting. Michael, I know this may not make sense to you right now, but I have been watching you from a distance. I saw the way you worked, the kind of man you became. I wanted to leave you something, not only wealth but freedom. I couldn't do it while you were married to her. I never trusted her. I saw through her long before you did, and I'm sorry you had to learn the hard way. Michael's throat tightened as he read. Another envelope contained a page that looked like it came from a journal decades old. The ink was faded, but the words struck him like thunder. Michael builds with his hands. He thinks with his heart. He'll be a better man than I ever was. Michael had to stop reading. His eyes burned, the page blurring as tears welled up. For years he had assumed Edward had simply walked away from family ties, buried in his world of wealth and secrecy. But the truth was the opposite. Edward had been planning all along, leaving something for Michael alone, waiting for the moment he would truly need it. Simon slid a final document across the polished desk. It was simple. Authorization for the full release of Edward's assets into any account Michael chose. Simon listed the details without flinching. Stocks spread across continents, significant gold reserves, and even a villa in the south of France that was technically now his. Michael's hands shook as he signed. In the span of seconds, his entire life had shifted yet again. But strangely, it wasn't the fortune itself that shook him most. It was the realization of why his uncle had done it. The flight home felt nothing like the flight over. Michael sat by the window, staring out at the expanse of clouds, knowing he wasn't the same man who had boarded days earlier. The bitterness of the divorce hadn't vanished, but it had lost its grip. He wasn't broken anymore. He was stripped down to the raw version of himself, and for the first time in years he felt grounded. When he landed, the first call he made was to Emily. He told her everything, every detail. She didn't ask about numbers or properties. She only asked one thing. Does this mean you're really coming back home? Michael smiled into the phone. Yes, sweetheart. I'm coming back. But home wasn't that bare apartment where he'd been surviving, and it certainly wasn't the mansion his ex-wife Lauren now occupied with Hank Miller, the man who had once been his closest friend. Home would be something new, something untouched by betrayal. Within weeks, Michael purchased a ranch house on the outskirts of Nashville. It wasn't extravagant, but it was honest. Open land, a gravel driveway, a wraparound porch, and an oak tree out front that had stood longer than he had been alive. He worked with his hands, fixing the place up himself. He laid flooring, installed new windows, built a deck, hammered each nail with purpose. Every strike felt like reclaiming something stolen from him. Not long after, Lauren called. He let it ring once, twice. Then he picked up. Her voice came through softer than he'd heard in years. Michael, I made a mistake. I never stopped loving you. I was confused, angry. I want to try again. He let her talk. Then he spoke with the calm she could never shake out of him. You didn't love me when I had everything. You loved what I gave you. Now you're calling because I'm worth more on paper. I'm not the man you left. I won't ever be yours again. Her silence broke into tears. He listened, then finally said, I forgive you, Lauren, but I won't forget. And I won't go back. Then he hung up. Soon after, Hank tried reaching out. Michael let the call go to voicemail. Mike, Hank's voice said, rough, uncertain. Man to man. I screwed up. I should have been honest. Things got complicated. Michael hit delete before the message finished. He didn't need excuses. He didn't need revenge. What he needed was peace. And for the first time in a long time, he had it. The last thing Edward had left him wasn't just in francs, stocks, or deeds. It was truth. He had seen what Michael couldn't. He had given him the means not just to rebuild but to breathe again. Michael still woke up before the sun, old habits that never left. But now, instead of pulling on work boots and heading to a job site with a thermos of black coffee, he sat on the porch of his new home, listening to the quiet. The house wasn't flashy. No marble floors, no chandeliers, just wood, stone, and honesty. Emily visited often. Sometimes she brought her guitar and sat on the edge of the porch strumming while he grilled or sipped coffee. She told him about her dreams, her plans for the future, including her idea to open a small cafe in town. Michael offered to back her fully, but Emily shook her head. She wanted to earn it herself, and in that moment Michael understood. His uncle had given him wealth, but more importantly, he had given him freedom. And now Michael could pass something even greater to his daughter, the courage to stand on her own. That's how I know Emily is going to be just fine. She's got a steady fire in her, one that doesn't burn reckless but burns true. I see the best of both her parents in her, my grit and her mother's determination. My only hope is that she learns to love better than Lauren and I did. My mom, Eileen, still lives in the same small house I grew up in. She refuses every offer I've made to buy her something newer or bigger. I've got what I need right here, she tells me. And she's right. I used to think progress meant upgrading, always reaching for more. But Mom showed me that sometimes the strongest step forward is staying planted in the right place. Lauren never called again after that night, and Hank never came knocking. Their choices are theirs to live with. I don't wish them harm, but I don't carry their weight anymore either. That chapter is over, and I've finally learned how to let go of what doesn't belong to me. These last few months have been about finding stillness. I bought a shepherd mix named Boone who never leaves my side. He's loyal, sharp, and has a way of reminding me every day what simple joy looks like. I spend time with a local veterans group, not because I served, but because I wanted to help. I build things for families who need them. Ramps for wheelchairs, benches in parks, decks for neighbors who can't afford contractors. Those projects remind me of who I've always been at the core. The work of your hands matters. No matter what's sitting in your bank account, I also decided to take a piece of what Uncle Edward left me and start something bigger than myself, a foundation called the Dawson Grant. Its purpose is to help single fathers trying to rebuild after divorce. I remember those nights sleeping in my truck, staring at the ceiling of a cab that smelled like sweat and sawdust, wondering if my life had already ended. No man should ever have to face that kind of loneliness without a hand reaching out. If even one father gets his footing back because of this, then everything I lost and everything I gained will mean something beyond me. The greatest truth I've come to is this: your worth isn't measured by what's taken from you or by what you own. It's measured by what you can rebuild when the world strips everything away. Money didn't heal me. It didn't erase betrayal or undo the nights of doubt and grief. But it gave me room to see myself clearly again, to step into the man I was before bitterness tried to bury me. So if you're hearing my story and you've been broken, if someone walked out on you, or took everything you thought defined your life, I want you to remember this. There's a part of you no one can ever take. It's still inside you, waiting. You just have to dig deep enough to find it. And when you do, guard it. Build around it. Let it guide you home. Thank you for walking with me through this story. If it touched you, if it stirred something in your heart, I'd ask for 3 things. Hit the like button. That simple act helps this story find others who need it. Share your thoughts in the comments, whether it's your own story or just the moment that hit you hardest. And subscribe, because this isn't the end for me. It's only the start of something better. My name is Michael Dawson, and I believe the best chapters of my life are still ahead.